Tom, appreciate you hopping on today. Youth sports, one of the most popular topics we have in the Aspen Institute latest report. So excited to dive into that and much more today.
Great to be here.
So give us a rundown. We all see these reports. We see all this data. It all comes from Aspen. But what is the Institute? How did you end up there? And ultimately, what are some of the main things? I know we'll dive deeper on them that you guys are focused on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I mean, I was an investigative reporter for ESPN for 20 years. Outside the Lines, E60 magazine.com, all that stuff, and it was great. Wrote this book in 2008 called "Game On: The All-American Race to Make Champions of Our Children." It was really the first journalistic survey of the landscape of youth sports in this country, the base of our sport ecosystem. Try to explain how, if we're the world's sports superpower, then why are only 1 out of every 4 or 5 kids physically active? What was it about our system that was not producing more physically active lifestyle? So a lot of work went into it, laid out the problems. And then that's when I partnered with the Aspen Institute to begin to solve these problems or address them and get all the right people around the table, the leagues, the media companies, the Olympic Committee, on, and really think about shared solutions. So here we are, 12 years into the launch of Project Play, which is all about how do you build healthy children and communities through sports. We produce reports, including our annual State of Play report. We try to aggregate and develop the best data in the space, trustworthy stuff that stakeholders from policymakers and foundations to private sector folks, entrepreneurs, park and recs people, anyone can use to begin to assess the state of play and then begin to think about how to get and keep more kids playing.
Got it. And then from like a business perspective, is it a nonprofit or for profit? What do you guys see?
The Aspen Institute has been around for 75 years. It is a not-for-profit, a nonpartisan organization based in Colorado and in Washington, D.C. I founded the only program at the Institute that is focused on sports. I got a little team of 9 people and a few consultants that punches way above its weight and produces these insights and ideas and opportunities to, like I said, get and keep kids playing sports.
Love that. And we'll focus a lot on your report today that came out last week. It's awesome. We'll make sure to put the link and everything. 10 youth sports trends to watch, State of Play 2024. And one of the top ones is private equity entering youth sports, and something a lot of people are talking about. We talked about it on a panel a couple of weeks ago. But how do you see the space? What are you paying attention to in it? And what's the impact already that you're witnessing from it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing you need to know about youth sports, the landscape of youth sports, and the marketplace of youth sports, is that there are, according to our research, north of $30 billion a year that are invested just by parents alone, just by families. That's not the public spend. That's not the sponsorship spend. Just parents, just families stroking these, $2,000, $3,000, $10,000 checks for their kids. So it's huge. I mean, $30 billion, obviously, Andrew, as you well know, is like more money flowing through it than the NFL or any professional league in the world. So it is a massive marketplace. We've got new research that'll be out in March that will update that number, and we think it'll be probably a good bit higher because that number is actually for pre-pandemic. So it's a huge space, and you can see why private equity would want to get into it. We've seen it in professional sports and college sports, and so why wouldn't it reach into the largest marketplace out there? The challenge with this space, and I think it'll be a challenge for private equity as well, it is a highly distributed space, right? That $30+ billion is being spent all over the place by a whole bunch of different organizations, many of which are not sophisticated, which are not linked. And it's not like we have like a ministry of sports in this country or some entity to coordinate or aggregate all the actors in the space. We really have no idea how many organizations are actually even providing youth sports. I mean, it's well north of 100,000 or so, but who knows? It could be closer to 1 million. Nobody knows. So it's a very difficult space to get your arms around. So as these private equity players enter this, Unrivaled or some of these other brands, youth enrichment brands, which has actually been in the space for a few years, I mean, we'll see what they do. I mean, I've tried to take a wait and see perspective. Some people are really cynical, I guess, about private equity, saying they're just going to come in and cut costs and wring as much value out of it, and they're gone in 3 to 5 years, whatever it may be. And maybe that happens. Maybe that happens. But I also wonder if private equity can come in and find efficiencies. More professional management, back end stuff, back office stuff. As they aggregate properties, do you not need to have 10 different HR departments or benefits departments, whatever it may be. So we'll see. We'll see. I think it's going to come down to whether private equity is good or bad for the space. Will come down to their smarts, their creativity, and their patience, and their willingness to look at the space and say, well, okay, 54% of kids are playing sports right now. That's down a bit, and a subset of that group is at the center of the travel team experience. So are we just going to try and wring more and more money out of a smaller and smaller group of families that can afford that experience? Or are we going to try and develop models, business models that are engage a broader swath of the youth population at maybe a little bit lower price point? I think that holds a lot of promise. I'd like to think that's the direction that it goes, because I think there's a lot of business that could be done by serving up models of sports that aren't $10,000 a year.
Yeah, and we'll get more on the participation. You said something interesting about Ministry of Sport. Do you think we'll just stick to the U.S., if the U.S. had that would be beneficial or not beneficial? What's your thoughts on that, just seeing it in obviously other countries?
Yeah, I mean, we have studied the world's leading sports systems. All this research is on our Project Play website. It's all free. We looked at the 10 leading sports systems from around the world. A bunch of countries in Europe. We looked at China, Australia, New Zealand, other places. We are definitely unique in that we do not have some kind of federal entity to coordinate sport development. In the case of China, it's very centralized. They actually run things in a significant way. But in places like England and Australia, it's more quasi-government, meaning in England, there is some, federal Department of Sport and Culture and Media, but really the work of coordinating activity in a place like England is run by Sport England, this quasi-government entity, which gets money from the lottery and some money from the federal government. And then they work with the schools and the national governing bodies, and they put together the data, and then they distribute hundreds of millions of dollars a year in grants. And so there are some interesting models around the world that I think would benefit us. I personally do not believe that turning over youth sports and centralizing it in a federal agency here and asking HHS or some other entity to do all the work I don't think Americans want that. I don't think, I think there's going to be a lot of bureaucracy around that, but I do think there is a real role for the federal government around collecting data, around being very clear about standards in engaging kids, around setting up governance structures. If you're going to outsource sport coordination to the U.S. Olympic Committee, the Olympic and Paralympic Committee, for instance, how do you do that in a way where it's not just an unfunded mandate, and they and the national governing bodies don't really have the resources or the authority to coordinate activity? So I think there's a really, really good conversation to be had about how do we develop sport policy that is going to help more of the energy and money in this space move less at cross purposes? Because I think all of us want to get and keep kids playing sports in this country. Kids who play sports are 6.4 times more likely to become avid fans of sports. So the media companies, everyone has an interest in having kids play into the teenage years and really into adulthood in some form or another. The conversation needs to happen. It absolutely needs to happen. I don't think a highly centralized structure works, but I do think there's a conversation around, do we need some kind of quasi-government entity similar to Sport England or Sport Australia that has, the ability to put together a strategic plan and properly govern, support, organize the national governing bodies? I think that's a worthy conversation to have.
And you talked about data in there, and obviously there's this art. I'm going to lead this into artificial intelligence, but there's a lot of people building in that space. It's hot right now, especially even on the sports side. And the main basis of a lot of people say, if you have the data, you can then build the AI on top of it. And in the state of play report, you touched on that a lot. So I don't want to go. I'll sort of let you go into it. But what are you seeing in that space? Because that obviously ties into even the data. And then if you have a central body like you were talking about there, whether affiliated with the government or not. But curious on the AI and sports as it's going downstream now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important maybe like start with the end in mind, right? Because you can get caught up in conversations about like AI right now and technology right now. But like at the end of the day, what kind of data environment do we want to have? I think the data environment we want to have are basically maps, data driven maps identifying all of the sports facilities around the country, all of the sports programs that exist in every community around the country. You overlay them with heat maps of demographics, and you begin to see where there are sport deserts and where there are opportunities for the private sector and for government and for philanthropy to begin to fill some of these gaps and ultimately provide parents with the tools to understand where are the programs in my community that meet the needs of my child and are aligned with best practices in athletic development and child development right now, because right now we have an environment where parents are just lost, right? Your kid turns 5, they have an opportunity to, you're about to sign them up for sports. You really don't know anything about the programs in your community. You might hear some things from your neighbors or whatever, but you might get a flyer in the backpack when you come home or an email, or you might see a little sign on the side of the road saying softball signups are here and there, but you have no idea if that organization is, if their coaches are background checked or have any kind of training, abuse prevention, or just even know what they're doing with the sport or otherwise. So it's a highly it's a place dominated by ignorance and love. Parents love the hell out of their kids. They'll do just about anything for them, but they're completely lost. But imagine an environment where, as a parent of a 5 or 6-year-old, you could go in there and you could go into your AI tool or maps or however it's organized and say, okay, well, I have a daughter. She's 5. She's interested in soccer. We want, as a family, here's kind of the price point we're interested. We want coaches who are, they've got background checks and they got minimum licenses. I don't know what it is. And AI, what do I need to know? And up pops guidance. Here's what you need to know, dear parent, about, your daughter and based upon your needs, how you should think about the long term, multi-sport play, when you need to do travel teams, the type of things you want to look for in coaches, et cetera. And here are 10 programs in your community that meet your needs. I mean, think about that. I think that would be a really powerful and beneficial use of technology and artificial intelligence. I think we could get there. I don't know if it'll be like tomorrow, but I think things are moving and will be moving pretty fast.
And so transitioning from like AI and data, which is great. And like you said, it can create some good opportunities to find the right fit for kid, parent, whatever. But we're also looking at your data, seeing a decrease in some of the participation numbers just across not just sports or team activities, but just in general for the youth. What are some of the numbers there? What's the trend? Why is that happening? What are you seeing? I mean, obviously coming off 2020, I think this was like your first main dive in since then. So obviously there was a huge disruption within the current state of what you guys do at Aspen even.
Yeah. I mean, the big picture, Andrew, is that youth sports as an institution has been transformed. The experience has been transformed over the past really 30 years or so. It's been transformed in part by the chase for athletic scholarships and preferential admission to schools. In the early 90s, there was about $250 million in athletic aid at Division I, Division II colleges that was handed out. And today that's closer to $4 billion. So, that's a lot of chum that's been thrown into the waters of youth sports, and it's made the parents a little bit crazy. And it's, really create an environment where we have these early forming travel teams, tryout based teams that in theory are going to position your child to get looks from college scouts at some point. So the whole space has been commercialized. Some people would say it's been professionalized. I don't think that's actually the case. It's just been commercialized. It's just there's more and more money in the space, more and more people making money off of it. I don't think it's gotten that much more professional, though. Professional means you've got standards for coaches, for programs in terms of how they deliver sport. And because there are not standards, we see things like high rates of burnout, high rates of, attrition, overuse injuries, ACL injuries are spiking significantly. We know that from our research. So it's a space where we just today very, kids play sports, 4, 5, 6 years old. It's local, it's rec. And then these travel teams form and it gets very expensive very quickly and more high pressure on kids and more single sport specialization. And you see this structural pushing aside of kids who can't afford the youth sports arms race. And then you see heaping a lot of pressure on the kids who are at the center of it. And then the economy of youth sports ends up catering to those kids who are at the center of the travel team, the so-called elite experience. And as a result, and we look at the big picture here. So for us, it's all about healthy kids and communities through sports. As a result, you have seen a shrinking number of kids who are actually playing sports. So it's this great irony that youth sports on one hand has exploded over the past 30 years. There's more money in the space. And yet we've seen a drop in participation. It has fallen pre-pandemic from about 58% of kids, according to the federal government, playing on an organized sport team, 2017, fell down to about 49% during the pandemic. Not a surprise with the shutdown. And then it's rebounded to about 53.8% of kids playing on a team or getting private lessons in some form after school or on weekends during the year. So, on some level, that's great. There are most kids playing sports, but that also means that almost half kids are not playing sports. And I can tell you that if you give kids a good in sports, we would have a lot more kids than 53.8% playing.
I do like the we'll call it the comparison of professionalization versus commercialization, because you hear them intertwined. But I guess sort of the goal has been it was just youth sports was just youth sports, then it commercialized, and now there's some professionalization trying to happen. Now, Tom, as you think about, we're at 54%, call it now. You guys have some initiatives and some goals to get that up. Tell us a little bit more about that and what the goal is to increase that back above even where it was before 2019 and earlier.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about Project Play is it's like a magnet. It's a magnet for a lot of the good people in sports who want sport to be everything it can be in our society. And that just simply starts with having access to sport. So we work with most of the professional leagues, ESPNs, Nikes, Under Armours, U.S. Olympic Committee, U.S. Tennis Association, the PGA of America, National Recreation Parks Association, several of the top foundations in the space. And they all kind of sit at our table and they share what they're doing to get and keep kids playing sports. And some of them are doing amazing stuff, or their foundations like the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, which has invested about $110 million, shaped by, reports and ideas that, we've produced for them in the Great Lakes region in Western New York. And so this group that has kind of been together for the better part of 10 years, we brought in some new players, has decided to lead this call to action to lift sport participation from 54% in this country to 63%. And that's not just a number that came out of nowhere. That is actually the public health goal of the federal government as set by an interagency group led by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, right? So, they collect the data and they're the ones who come up with that 53, what is now 53.8%. And it is in the public health goals to get to 63.3%. But government alone is not going to do this. It's really going to take government plus philanthropy plus plus the private sector, and specifically the sports sector, to move that number up. So I'm really proud that this group of significant organizations are now treating this as their North Star. That how can we get to 63%? By the end of the decade. And we're developing a strategic plan around that. We will be talking more publicly about that early next year and at the Project Place Summit in March in the Bay Area. But it's pretty exciting. There are these huge tentpole events that are coming through our landscape in the coming years. We've got the World Cup in 2026, obviously. We've got the Olympics and Paralympics in 2028. And so how do we use some of these tentpole events to build, to lift youth sport participation and build the goal of Project Play, which is a youth-centered sport ecosystem that serves all. So how can we, establish that all children should have a right to play sports in some form or another, and when in the care of adults, that their human rights that every human being is born with, is recognized in United Nations human rights doctrine, that it's honored and adhered to. The right to have your voice heard, and health, and access to education, and things like this. And I think this is really important, Andrew, because we are at a time when youth sports, there's a lot of pressures on it. There's a lot of pressures on kids, and we now have NIL coming down the pike in a pretty significant ways. Not just college athletes who are getting NIL money, now are now high school athletes, and we're living in an environment where everything is being videotaped now. Through some of the technology. There are kids born today who will have every moment of their youth sport and high school sport experience taped with the help of AI and other technologies. And that stuff can be aggregated and turned into content and monetized. And so we've got some really big questions about, turning kids into content and monetizing it going forward. So business is going to happen. A marketplace is a marketplace. Money is going to chase money. But as we reach down into, below the age of 18 and even below the age of 12, how do we make sure that the health, of kids is being prioritized, and they're being protected in some form or another? So it's it's an ambitious 63 by 30 is what we call it. It's a very ambitious thing. It's the sort of thing you would like if we did have a sports ministry in this country. It would with $100 billion budget. It's the kind of thing they would do. We don't have that. We've got a couple $1 million budget, and like I said, a little team, but a lot of significant organizations that are sitting at the table and are going to think about how they can make a contribution in helping the nation get to 63 by 30. So we'll see. We're going to take our best swing.
Yeah. What's the is it supposed to add up to 100 or like obviously it doesn't. Is there another number in there, or it's just sort of 63? What am I missing?
No, 63% youth sport participation by the year 2030.
Got it.
Yeah, move 54 to 63%.
Got it. And then when you look at these tentpole events, obviously we just had Paris. Do you see, is there anything in the data? And obviously, I don't know how far back we can go, or when was the last one? 90? When was LA the first time in the 90s or something?
Yeah. Well, Atlanta was in 1996. LA was in 84. Yeah, this is a really interesting moment. If you look at these mega sporting events, they have usually produced a really valuable legacy related to youth. So the 1984 Olympics produced a surplus, half of which went to create foundations for the national governing bodies of sports in this country. And then half went to a local foundation in LA, which became, a grant maker and has an endowment and still is doing good work and distributing a few $1 million a year in grants. Then you move to the 1994 World Cup in the US. And that not only led to the launch of MLS, but also created the U.S. Soccer Foundation, which is still around today and doing terrific work in building mini pitches around the country, and has set some real goals related to the 2026 World Cup. And that's terrific. Then you moved to 2002 with the Salt Lake City Olympics, and that created the Utah Legacy Foundation, which helped, build and maintain youth facilities and programs in Utah. So and then you look at France this year. I mean, look, I thought it was the best sporting event in the history of sporting events, just from like a viewer point of view, and the storylines and the themes that were elevated. But when I look at Paris, what really makes me feel great, and I think should be something of an inspiration to us, a bit of a North Star for us, is they did three things. They used the games to introduce sports prescriptions in that country. So now you can go to a doctor, and the doctor can say, well, you would benefit from, physical activity. So you can, if you work under, we can connect you with a coach or a physical therapist or somebody who is, I think it's coaches actually. If they're like qualified, and they're, not just anybody, but a qualified coach, you can actually get that stuff. The healthcare system will handle it. Number two, they use the Olympics policymakers there did to get 30 minutes of physical activity into all public schools around the country. And number three, they created a voucher program where 50 euros, or basically $50, the kid could take to their local, qualified sport club and get a discount to sign up. So, I mean, three things that are going to leave France in a better place in terms of their sports system and kids being physically active. So how do we do that as we think about the World Cup coming through, as we think about the Olympics and Paralympics? I mean, I don't think we just want to throw a big party. I mean, it's going to be a great party. That's going to be awesome. All of it's going to be a terrific spectator experience. But how do we make sure that these events leave a legacy that communities and children are truly going to see benefits from over time?
Yeah, it's fascinating. We could go all day. This is a great conversation, Tom. I got so many other things, but we can always run it back in 25 after your summit and stuff. So I guess to close it out, website where people can get, obviously we'll put the link to it, but if people want to check out some of your other stuff, what's your website, or where can people learn more about everything you got going on at Aspen and also Project Play?
Yeah, just projectplay.org. It's all on there, all free resources. We have parent checklists, 10 questions to ask yourself, your child, your local sport provider. There, you can read all of our reports. We've got, deep dive local reports from 14 communities around the country where we survey kids. What are you playing? What do you want to play? Why are you not playing? Here's some ideas and recommendations. We have our national state of play report, which we released last week. So again, aggregated and analyzed the latest data on participation and coaching, and identified 10 trends to watch in youth sports. There's all sorts of stuff. And you can sign up for the, Project Play Summit is our big event, Andrew. Love to have you. Love to host you this year. It's March 24th and 25th at UC Berkeley. It sells out every year, a couple months ahead of time. I'm sure it'll do the same this year. But high profile folks, great conversations. It's kind of where we take measure of the state of play and chart next steps and building healthy kids and communities through sports. So yeah, it's all on there. It's all available. And hopefully these are insights, ideas, and opportunities that people can rally around.
Love that. Yeah. Well, make sure to go on the website, check it out, and head out to the summit. I'm sure it's this little mini conversation really magnified to everything, because there's so much more. From, you guys touched on climate change to just numbers and NIL, and honestly, we'll be here for 2 hours. So, but we got the core main things, which is awesome. So I appreciate you coming on, Tom.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and really appreciate your work in the space, Andrew. I mean, you've made some pretty dense topics accessible to people through your intelligence and your packaging, and I appreciate your interest in our topic and what's happening at the base of our sport ecosystem.
If we don't take care of that, then the rest will just fall away. I don't think people realize that either. So it is probably the most important piece of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's the foundation. It's the foundation for all the good stuff that happens in sports.